Imagine waking up to find your dream home, a mountain mansion you built with years of hard work, reduced to rubble, not by nature, not by accident, but by the very people who were supposed to protect your neighborhood. That's right, the HOA. They claimed I didn't pay their endless stack of fines, but the truth runs much deeper. And here's the twist. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just another homeowner they could push around. I also happened to be their governor. It all started small, like these things usually do. A letter in the mail, a fine for something as ridiculous as the color of my front gate not matching their standards. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was a mistake. But soon, the notices kept piling up. Fees for the driveway stonework, violations for the cabin-style windows, even penalties for how the pine trees around my house grew. Every time I tried to reason with them, I was met with arrogance, as if they held absolute power. What they didn't count on was how personal this would become. My mountain mansion wasn't just a house. It was where my family gathered, where we celebrated holidays, and where I found peace after long political battles. To the HOA, it was just leverage. To me, it was everything. When I refused to pay their bogus fines, they took the ultimate step. Without warning, without compassion, they brought in demolition crews and flattened my home to the ground. The sound of walls crashing, glass shattering, and memories being buried under debris will never leave me. But here's where they made their biggest mistake. They thought I was powerless. They thought they could break me. They had no idea who they were actually up against. The strange part is, this fight with the HOA didn't come out of nowhere. From the very first day I moved into that mountain community, I could feel the tension. Some of the board members acted like they owned the land, strutting around with clipboards, pointing out so-called violations to anyone who dared live differently. At first, I stayed quiet. I figured, let them have their little rules, fresh paint here, trimmed hedges there. But it didn't take long before I realized their power wasn't about keeping the neighborhood beautiful. It was about control. The mansion I built stood out. It wasn't flashy in a tacky way. It was strong, handcrafted, full of character. The stonework came from the very mountainside, the tall beams were carved from local timber, and every detail had meaning. Neighbors admired it, but the HOA saw it as a threat. Maybe it was jealousy, maybe it was politics, or maybe they just couldn't stand the fact that someone wasn't bowing to their checklist. Whatever the reason, their attitude shifted from polite warnings to full-on harassment. They started sending letters almost weekly. One claimed my deck railing was 2 inches too high. Another insisted the natural rock pathway didn't fit community guidelines. Even when I fixed what they demanded, more fines appeared. It became clear they weren't looking for compliance. They were looking for submission. And here's the part that still stings. Some of my neighbors, good people, whispered that I should just pay up and avoid trouble. But deep down, I knew if I gave in once, they'd never stop. My mansion wasn't just a target. It became a symbol of resistance against their unchecked authority. What none of them realized, though, was that every notice, every fine, every threat they threw my way was pushing me closer to a line they never should have crossed. And once they crossed it, there was no turning back. The conflict grew heavier with each passing week, and it wasn't just about the mansion anymore. It became a battle of pride, of principle, and of power. The HOA board started holding secret meetings, ones I wasn't invited to, but always heard whispers about. Neighbors told me they'd seen trucks parked late at night near the clubhouse, men in suits carrying folders, and heated arguments spilling into the parking lot. It was clear something bigger was brewing, and my home was at the center of it. I started piecing together what was really happening. Some board members had their eyes on the land my mansion sat on. It wasn't just prime mountain property. It was valuable, the kind developers drooled over. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were laying the groundwork to take what they wanted. Every bogus fine, every complaint, every threat was part of a calculated plan to break me down until I walked away. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't going anywhere. At the same time, I noticed the tension spilling into my relationships with neighbors. Some quietly supported me, dropping notes of encouragement or stopping by to say they admired my stand. Others kept their distance, worried the HOA's wrath would extend to them if they showed loyalty. A few even sided openly with the board, repeating the same talking points about protecting community values, as if they'd been coached. The division was sharp, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was feeding lies about me to keep the heat turned up. What made it worse was watching my family bear the weight. My wife avoided neighborhood events, tired of the stares and whispers. My kids asked why their friends couldn't come over without their parents complaining. The HOA had turned a peaceful mountain retreat into a war zone, and we were trapped in the middle. But deep inside, I knew the demolition of my mansion wasn't their endgame. It was just their opening move. The day everything reached its boiling point began like any other, quiet and calm in the mountains. But beneath that calm, I could feel something was about to break. The HOA had stopped sending letters and fines. The silence itself felt dangerous, like they were preparing for something bigger. My instincts told me they weren't finished, not by a long shot. Then came the notice, not delivered by mail, but hand-delivered by a pair of men in suits who barely looked me in the eye. It wasn't a fine this time. It was a final warning. Pay every outstanding fee within 7 days or face consequences. The wording was cold, almost smug, and for the first time, I realized they weren't even pretending to follow their own rules anymore. This wasn't about violations, it was about crushing me. I started documenting everything, photos of the property, records of every letter, even recordings of conversations with board members. It wasn't just about protecting my mansion anymore, it was about exposing the truth. But the more I dug, the darker it got. I uncovered whispers of shady land deals, favoritism in contracts, and even payouts that never showed up in the official records. The HOA wasn't just a homeowners association, it was a machine, feeding on fear and silence. Meanwhile, the pressure at home kept climbing. My family packed up belongings, just in case, their voices shaky as they asked what would happen if the HOA carried through on their threats. I tried to stay calm, but even I could feel the storm closing in. Each night, I looked out over the mountains, wondering if tomorrow would be the day they made their move. And then, without warning, the trucks came rumbling up the winding road toward my mansion. The trucks didn't stop at the gate like I expected. They drove straight up the gravel path, headlights glaring, engines roaring as if they owned the place. My family rushed to the windows, fear in their eyes, while I stepped outside to confront them. But here's the twist. These weren't just demolition crews. Alongside the workers were HOA board members, clipboards in hand, grinning as if this was some victory parade. They had security with them too, men in dark jackets who clearly weren't there to trim hedges or measure railings. One of the board members stepped forward, waving a stack of papers, claiming they had full legal authority to tear down my mansion immediately. The signatures on the documents looked suspicious, and I knew enough about contracts to recognize they weren't legitimate. Still, they acted like nothing could stop them. The arrogance in their voices, the smirk on their faces, it wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. It was about humiliation. Just as I was about to challenge them, another twist surfaced. A neighbor I thought had been silent all along rushed over, shouting for me not to trust anyone. He claimed the HOA wasn't working alone, that there was a developer pulling strings behind the scenes, waiting to snatch up my land once the mansion was gone. That revelation hit like a thunderclap. Suddenly, the constant harassment, the mounting fines, even the rushed demolition made perfect sense. My home wasn't their target. My land was the prize. The workers started their machines, the rumble shaking the ground beneath us. My family huddled together, torn between disbelief and fear. I stood my ground, heart racing, knowing the fight had escalated far beyond neighborly disputes. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was political, and the stakes had never been higher. The roar of engines grew louder as the demolition crews prepared to strike. My family clung to me, their eyes filled with fear, but I refused to step aside. With the board members smirking from the sidelines, I pulled out the one card they never saw coming. I called in state enforcement, not as a homeowner begging for mercy, but as their governor with the authority to halt the operation. Within minutes, official vehicles wound up the mountain road, lights flashing against the trees. The workers froze, unsure whether to continue or retreat, and the smug confidence on the HOA board's faces began to crack. I demanded to see the so-called paperwork. Under the harsh glare of spotlights, the truth unraveled, signatures forged, permits falsified, and every legal authority they claimed completely fabricated. The crowd that had gathered from nearby homes gasped as the lies were exposed. The developer's name, hidden behind shell companies, was finally revealed, and neighbors who once doubted me now saw the scheme for what it really was. My mansion had been nothing more than bait in their greedy game. The HOA board members tried to backpedal, stammering excuses, but it was too late. State officials placed them under investigation right on the spot. The demolition crews packed up their machines, muttering as they rolled back down the mountain, leaving the mansion standing tall against the night sky. Relief swept through my family as the nightmare we'd lived for months finally shattered. But just as I thought it was over, a final twist surfaced. Among the documents was proof that one of my closest allies in the community had been feeding the HOA information all along, betraying my trust from the start. The house was safe, the board defeated, but a deeper betrayal still lingered in the shadows. And the weeks that followed, the mountain finally felt quiet again. My mansion still stood, though the echoes of that night remained heavy in its walls. The HOA board members were suspended, their power stripped, while state investigators combed through years of shady dealings. The developer who had been pulling strings from behind the curtain faced charges, and for the first time, the community began to see just how deep the corruption had run. What had once seemed like petty fines and rules turned out to be part of a much bigger scheme. Neighbors who had kept their distance started showing up at my door, some with apologies, others with stories of how they, too, had been pressured or threatened into silence. The unity that had been broken slowly began to mend. We held open meetings without the old board, and for the first time, people spoke freely about what they wanted our mountain community to be. It wasn't about rules and fines anymore. It was about respect, fairness, and restoring trust. As for the betrayal I uncovered, it stung more than I expected. A friend I thought I could count on had been feeding information to the HOA, hoping to protect their own property from fines. It was a wound that would take time to heal, but it also reminded me of the weight fear can put on people. Not everyone was strong enough to push back, and in their own way, they had been victims too. Looking back, the biggest lesson wasn't about power or politics, it was about standing firm when you know you're in the right. My mountain mansion was more than just a home. It became a reminder that no matter how strong the opposition, truth has a way of standing taller than any wall they try to tear down.